Hey, what happens to your rifle if you take it out of one chassis and put it into another one? Does all hell break loose? We decided to test the MDT Pro and the ATX Remington 700 chassis with a Impact 737, and here are the results. Okay, so we started with a 308 and put it in the MDT chassis, but we took a couple shots at 500 yards to film another video. Came here to check zero, and this was the initial zero check with the MDT. The MDT has an offset with its zero, because I didn't spin the rings, of down 0.1. I put it at zero to check the ATX. We pulled it out and we put it on the ATX, and the very first shot of the ATX went high, and then the next two went here, and so I split the difference as +2, even though these are only a 10th high, and noted that as an offset of potentially -2 from zero. Okay, so then we put it back in the MDT, and the first shot, having remounted it, went to the right, and then the other two came back to zero, and I thought that was interesting. We put it in the ATX and shot again, this time with a -2, and it was a 10th low, but a good group, right? Okay, so then we came back with the MDT and shot another group at -1 and got an even better group than the first one. And these are about 1/2 a tenth to the right of the point of aim, but I wanted to hold that point of aim to make sure. So we got this third group that was very small. It would fit inside this first group, which is about less than 1/2 an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 1/3 of an inch. This would have fit in there too. So then I put it back in the ATX at -1 and shot this group, and then we followed that up with another shot, taking it out, putting it back in, and had it -1, -1, and all three shots were center. So what I see here is that for some reason, the very first time that we put the action in the chassis, there was a shot that went outside it, but subsequent remountings, they grouped just fine. And none of these groups are bigger than about 1/3 of an inch. And the offsets that you see are the result of trying to figure out what those offsets are. And so the ATX, it's zero. If I just swapped them out, I would have to be -0.1, and this would be -0.1. And they're pretty equivalent and very consistent, and the only odd thing was that very first remounting had a shot that went outside the norm, but then every subsequent remounting, they were good. I think that both of them have a slight, very slight right shift, but I don't think a 10th would take that out, and I didn't want to mess with it. I think it's easy to be caught up between equipment error and equipment inconsistency and shooter error and shooter inconsistency. Absolutely both can happen. And absolutely we see something that shows that there's very subtle variations when equipment is mounted and remounted, but those subtle variations aren't enough to be able to outshoot with wind and distance reading. And I think it's good for you to know and have some proof that you can do certain things and it won't affect the outcome downrange. It's also good to know what does have an effect and what will have an impact on making impacts downrange. And the best way to do that is to prove it on paper with repetitions so that you have recorded offsets and recorded effects of when I do this, this is what I see. When I do this, this is what I see. And at this point, I wouldn't be concerned with swapping out my chassis in the field because the effects are ultimately minuscule once we take into account the offsets that we need to make between the two because they're consistent.